So now we can move to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is about how to think like an economist. So in this chapter, we'll look at what economists do. They have two roles. Then we'll look at models and how economics uses models. We have two examples here. One is the circular flow diagram, and the other is the production possibility frontier. And then we'll look at what is the difference between micro and macroeconomics, and what is positive and normative. So economists plays two roles. One is as a scientist. You try to explain the world. The other is be a policy advisor. You try to improve the world. And as scientists, we use the scientific method. So you try to develop and test theories about how the world works. So you try to come up with economic theories. You collect data, you analyze the data, and to see if you verify the theory or you refute the theory. Because of that, economists make assumptions. So you try to simplify the complex world and make it easier to understand. For example, when we talk about international trade, one simplified example is to think about only two countries producing two goods. So, of course, two countries is a simplification, and no country produces only two goods. These assumptions are made to simplify things. And by doing this, we use models to study economic issues. So this is a simplified representation of a more complicated reality. So think about what are models. For example, think about this map. This is a MRT map of Taipei MRT. Of course, this is not real. And in fact, it's not even to scale. I mean, if you put a Taipei city map in front of you, I mean, this MRT map is just completely off. But the whole point for an MRT map is to give you an idea of the network. If you want to go to Danshui, so how would you transfer between the, say, the brown line and the red line, and so that you can go to Danshui? Or you might need to go from the green line from Gongguan Station, and which place do you want to transfer? For that purpose, well, this MRT map is perfect. Okay, so for teaching purposes, well, you need an anatomical model of a human being. I mean, this Lego model is no comparison to the real one. But, well, that's the whole point. I mean, by looking at this model, you can see, oh, here's the stomach, here's the intestines, here's your bladder, here are your bones and your lungs, and so on. So economists use simplified models. So before I go on, I do want to say one thing. So in the textbook, it talks about observations and then developing theories and then testing this with more observations, collecting the data and analyzing the data. But for myself, I think you have not only observations and theoretical models, but also empirical experiments. So because experimental economics is the research I do want to take a little bit of time to introduce this. It's a growing field. And what is a controlled experiment? It's a highly simplified environment of a more complicated reality. Just like models are a highly simplified representation of a more complicated reality. So the first Bank of Sweden Prize in memory of Alfred Nobel. So the first winner in economics for experimental economics is Vernon Smith. He's called the living tradition, the living Tversky tradition. Amos Tversky should have won the prize with him. Amos is a psychologist, but he died before that. But he's the living tradition, yeah. And then there's Elinor Ostrom. So Lynn is a political scientist. He's the first female to win the prize in economics. And she actually did a lot of these case studies and experiments to see how different societies, different groups of people manage common resources. L. Roth, so he started out doing bargaining experiments, but then he did a lot of market design. especially matching markets in the field. He even does kidney exchange. We'll see that when we get to that. And more recently, Dick Thaler, in 2017, he won the prize for behavioral finance. And Esther Duflo and Michael Kremer, they won in 2019 to run field experiments. So this is done in developing countries. So if you look at the past 20 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the prizes was given to experimental related work. So that's how much experimental economics is booming. Okay, so let's go back to the textbook. So the first model we'll see is the circular flow diagram. So this is a visual model of the economy and shows how money flows through the markets among households and firms. So we have two decision makers. One is the firm, one is the household, or firms and households. And they interact in two markets. Markets for goods and services, and markets for factors of production or inputs. So again, remember, see, to try to get the whole economy, we're sort of simplifying this to two actors and two markets. Of course, that's just a simplified representation. I mean, no economy has only two markets. Here, we have firms and households. So the households, they have factors of production, they have labor. They can sell or rent these factors of production to the firms to earn income, but they have to buy and consume goods and services. The firms, so they buy or hire factors of production. They use these to produce goods and services, and they sell them on the market to households. So we have two markets. One is the markets for goods and services. The other is the markets for factors of production. So the goods and services are bought and so the seller here is the firms. The buyer is the household. For the markets of factors, so these are inputs. So the households sell to the firms. So the buyers are the firms, the sellers are the household. These are the flip side of each other. All right, so now you can see how this works. So in the market of factor production, households provide labor, land, capital, and all these things. So those are sold or rented to the firms. And of course, the firms would pay wages, rent, profit, and these will be the income of households. So this is this market. On the other side, you have the markets for goods and services, where the households spend, they buy these goods and services. These will become the revenue of the firms. And of course, these goods and services are sold from the firms by the household. Okay, if you think of this whole picture, this is the circular flow diagram. It gives you a simplified representation of the whole economy. I mean, it's not realistic. I mean, the economy is more complicated than this, but that's a model. But it captures at least some aspects that we're interested in. Okay, the second example of the model is the production possibility frontier. So this is a graph that shows a lot of combinations of output that the economy can possibly produce. And given available factors of production and the available technology. So here we're going to assume a country that produces only two goods, chipsets and tea. Oh, that looks like Taiwan, right? I mean, we produce a lot of chipsets and our farmers grow tea. So it has a fixed amount of resources, labor. It has a fixed amount of technology, and that's fixed. And so let's say, given these resources and technology, you can use to produce only tea, only chipsets, or a combination of the two. So these are just a few possibilities. But if you put all of the labor into producing tea, you get tea. And of course, no chipsets. If you put everything into chipsets, then you get no tea. So if you put some labor into chipsets, some into T, then you get different combinations. So one thing you should look at, so suppose you increase the production of chipsets from 0 to 20. How many tons of T do you have to give up? You have to give up 1,000 tons of T because you're dropping the T production from 5,000 to 4,000. You can actually draw this PPF, production possibility frontier. 0, 5,000, so that's this point, point A. 100, 0, that's point E. And the points B, so 20 chipsets and 4,000 tons of T, that's point B. 50, 2,500, that's point C. 80 chipsets and 1,000 tons of T, that's point D. This whole line is your production possibility frontier. On this line, this is what we call efficient outcomes because you're using up all of the resources and that's the amount you can produce. And of course, if you have points that are inside this line, this PPF, these are what we call inefficient levels of production because you can't produce them. Also, if you go beyond the PPF, these are points that are outside, and this is not feasible because you can't produce, you don't have enough resources and technology to produce that. Okay, so use the graph from the previous example, and would it be possible for the economy to produce the following combinations? Point F, so 80 chipsets and 4,000 tons of T. Point G, 30 chipsets and 25,000 tons of T. So let's go back to the graph. This is your graph. And so let's look at these new points. All right, so we should prepare to join the quiz. So is it possible to produce 80 chipsets and 4,000 tons of T? Yes, no, I don't know. Again, we have 30 seconds for this. This is a different Slido event compared to chapter 1. So if you can't find it, please scan the QR code. Okay, so time's up. So let's look at the results. 7 of you say yes, 50 of you say no, and 1 don't know. Well, it's okay to don't know. And the answer is no, it's not feasible. What about point G? 30 chipsets, 2,500 tons of T. Is it feasible? Is it possible to produce this combination? Yes, no, or don't know. Okay, I think we have like 5 seconds left, so please hurry up. Okay, so now time's up. 58 of you say yes, 1 says don't know, and 9 of you say no. And the answer is yes. Okay, so most of you got it. Oh, you guys are so good. Let's look at point F. Point F is 80 chipsets and 4,000 tons of T. It's outside the PPF. It's not possible. Point G. So point G is 30 chipsets, 2,500 tons of T. This is possible. It's inside the PPF, but it's not efficient because some resources are not used. Society could have produced even more than that. Okay, up to here we know that if you're on the PPF, it's efficient. All resources are fully utilized. If it's under the PPF, it's possible, but not efficient. Some resources are not used. Some workers are unemployed. Factories are laying idle, not working. No pay leaves, 无薪假, things like that. And if you have points that are above the PPF, that's not possible. Okay, so if you move along the PPF, you're shifting resources from producing one good to the other. And so here the society is facing a trade-off. You get more of one good only if you give up or sacrifice something else. So the slope of this PPF gives you the opportunity cost of one good in terms of the other. So, okay, think of to produce the first 1,000 tons of tea. Well, you're giving up 20 chipsets. So now we can try to calculate the opportunity cost of one chipset and the opportunity cost of 1 ton of tea. So, okay, let's see. It's a slope. So to produce 1,000 tons of tea, how much do you need to give up? The chipset production drops from 100 to 80. So it's minus 20. So here the slope is minus 0.002. So the opportunity cost for 1 ton of tea is 0.02 chipset. Or the flip side is the opportunity cost of 1 chipset is 50 tons of tea. Okay, now we're going to go to economic growth. If the country gets additional resources, or you have an improvement in technology, then the economy can produce more. Say more tea, or more chipsets, or any combination in between. So when we see the PPF pushing outward, that is economic growth. In our example here, the PPF is a straight line. You have constant opportunity cost. In the previous examples, the opportunity cost is 1 chipset equals to 50 tons of tea. You can think of other examples where the PPF is bowed outward. This represents increasing opportunity costs. So to produce more units of the same good, you need to give up even more of the other good produced. Before I go on, so there was a question about the loopy game experiment. So can you explain why and what does it mean to assume Poisson? Yeah, so at some sense, that's why I say that the exams will not ask you about that. Because the Poisson distribution is something you would learn in second year statistics and econometrics. And so to do that calculation, you really need enough knowledge in mathematics and especially calculus and second year statistics. But the Poisson assumption, the essence of this is that you think the distribution of number of players playing this game is has this distribution where the mean equals its variance, and it has this time invariant. It has these interesting invariant properties of the distribution, so that suppose everybody is playing a mixed strategy, say playing rock, paper, scissors with 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Then the distribution of rock is also a Poisson distribution, but with a 1/3 of the mean. The distribution of the paper and scissors is also a Poisson distribution, and it's independent. Yeah, so they have the very interesting properties of this distribution, but it's really beyond the scope of this class to actually go into the math details. The second question was, it seems that the empirical results is different from the theory or the curve. So can I say that just a theory, it's just a theory rather than a real phenomenon? Yeah, so if you think of it, the Poisson equilibrium prediction, I mean, it's never achieved in the data. So in that sense, it's wrong. But if you look at people round by round play, it looks like people are converging towards the Poisson equilibrium. And remember, the reason is because if people deviate from the equilibrium, so certain numbers would have a much higher winning probability than other numbers. And like at the very beginning, 1 is chosen too often. Of course, the winning probability of 1 is much smaller compared to these other numbers. And then, but of course, people learn about that through time, and they flood to these higher winning probability numbers. But of course, that reduces the probability of those numbers to be winning. And so things sort of start to evolve and eventually cancel out. So in that respect, pointing towards where people, after sufficient learning, will head towards, the Poisson equilibrium is actually quite accurate. It's going towards that direction. And in fact, so that's why in the slides that I showed, there are 3 different theories. The first one is the equilibrium theory. That's where you eventually end. But then you have the initial response, what happens at the very beginning. That's the cognitive hierarchy model. And how do you go from the initial response to the equilibrium? You have this convergence, which is explained by an imitation learning model. These are actually 3 different models to try to explain this very complex behavior. But also, I do want to say that even though we focus on equilibrium in this class, usually you find the glass is half full, half empty. But that's precisely because economics is not like the Bible. I mean, the textbook is not a Bible. There is room for theory to improve. That's why you need more data. You collect more empirical data or run more experiments, and hopefully you can come up with new theory to better explain the data that you have. All right, so now let's go back to chapter 2, and I'll show the slides. Here is the PPF. So this is another country where you produce only beer or mountain bikes. And you see that the PPF becomes steeper as the opportunity cost of mountain bikes is going up. So why is that? At the very beginning, say if you think of point A, so the opportunity cost of producing mountain bikes is low because most workers are producing beer. So even those bike builders that are very good at building mountain bikes, they're producing beer. Of course, that's not good for them. And so, well, I mean, if you want to shift these excellent bike builders to build bikes, the opportunity cost or the loss of beer is not much because they're not good at brewing beer anyway. But if you add point B, so now most workers are producing mountain bikes, and even the best beer brewers, now you're forcing them to produce even more mountain bikes, and that means that you have to give up a lot of beer production. Okay, so this is the sort of rationale of having a PPF that's bowed outward. So the PPF is bowed outward because different workers have different skills. Now that means that different opportunity costs of producing one good in terms of the other. And it could also be that there's some other resource that has varying opportunity costs. If you think of land, when more land is used, then the opportunity cost for the remaining land is higher. Also, different types of land could be more suited for different types of uses. Okay, so up to here, we see 2 models. Do you have any questions about this part? What does the equilibrium mean again? Okay, so think of the loopy game. How can you optimize and win the prize in the loopy game? You basically have to think about which number has the highest winning probability. So suppose nobody's picking 1. That means if you choose 1, you win for sure. You have a winning probability of 100%. Well, I mean, depending on what other people are doing, the distribution of other people's guesses, well, you can calculate different winning probabilities for choosing 2, choosing 3, choosing 4, and so on. So the idea here is that if you're really optimizing, you should pick the number that has the highest winning probability. So if nobody's picking 1, well, picking 1 is your best choice because you can win for sure. Of course, if somebody is choosing 1 with some probability, then your winning probability for choosing 1 is not 100%. You have to calculate depending on what other people's, how do they guess. And so the whole challenge for the loopy game is you have to calculate the winning probability for each of these numbers. And once you do that, you're done. Just pick the highest, the number that gives you the highest winning probability. And so the whole complication where we impose the Poisson distribution is to try to have a simplified way to calculate this probability. Of course, that's a simplified assumption. It's not. It's likely not true empirically, but yeah, that's the assumption that we impose. But even with this unrealistic assumption, we do get an equilibrium that it seems that people are converging towards. So in that sense, it's reasonably accurate enough. So there, it's really about the winning probability. I already said, if nobody's picking 1, then you win by picking 1. And so what is the probability that nobody's picking 1? That would be the winning probability for choosing 1. How would you win by choosing 2? Nobody's picking 2, and nobody's uniquely picking 1. Of course, you have to do a very complicated calculation based on other people's strategies to get what is the probability that this event is going to happen. What is the winning probability if you choose 3? Well, to win by choosing 3, nobody has to choose 3. And nobody can uniquely pick 1. Nobody can uniquely pick 2. So then you need a very complicated calculation to try to calculate what is the probability that this event is going to happen, and so on. So what is the winning probability if you to pick 100? Well, nobody is uniquely picking 1. Nobody is uniquely picking 2. And nobody is uniquely picking 3, and so on, all the way up to nobody's uniquely picking 99, and nobody's picking 100. Okay, yeah, so that's that part. All right, so let's proceed. So what is microeconomics versus macroeconomics? So in Bauman's translation, he says that microeconomists are people who are wrong about specific things, and macroeconomists are people who are wrong about things in general. That's a parody, that's a joke. So microeconomics, this is the study of how households and firms make decisions and how they interact in the market. That's why the first 7 principles of economics, we talk a lot about this. And macro is the study of economy-wide phenomena like inflation, unemployment, economic growth. That's the last 3 principles that we saw in chapter 1. And what I do want to add, I think that this is not in the textbook, but the recent development is that to provide micro foundation of macroeconomics. That means that these 2 theories are actually converging or unifying. So there is a distinction of micro and macro, but we are moving towards this unified theory where all the macro theory have micro foundation. Okay, so up to here we looked at economists as scientists to collect data, develop theory, test theory, and advance science. Economists would also work as policy advisors. So here we'll talk about this. We have to make the distinction between positive statements, which are descriptive, how the world works. So for example, you have this statement that a minimum wage law causes unemployment. Then you can collect data to see you can confirm or refute this statement. Compared to what we call normative statements, which are prescriptive. So you try to say how the world should be. For example, the government should raise the minimum wage. This is a normative statement. It says what the government should do. And so the distinction between this and the positive statement is that, well, if I say the government should raise minimum wage, that's my opinion. It's based on a value judgment. And you can't really collect evidence to try to falsify this statement. But you can collect evidence to falsify a positive statement. So to give you an idea, here we have this exercise. So positive or normative. So we have a whole bunch of statements. Statement A, prices rise when the government increases the quantity of money. Positive or normative. Statement B, the government should print less money. Statement C, a tax cut is needed to stimulate the economy. Statement D, an increase in the price of burritos will cause an increase in consumer demand for movie streaming. This looks weird. Anyway, so are these statements positive or normative? Now let's go through the quiz. So here we have the quiz. Great. Please get ready. So positive or normative? Prices rise when the government increases the quantity of money. Positive, normative, or don't know? So we have 30 seconds for this, so you can take your time. I think we have only 5 seconds left, so please hurry up. Okay, so 43 of you say positive, 14 of you say normative, and the answer is this is a positive statement. Next one, the government should print less money. Positive, normative, or don't know? Yeah, we'll see the answers after this question. So now we have 10 seconds left. If you have not made your choice, please hurry up. Okay, time's up. Let's look at the results. 4 of you think it's positive, 3 don't know. 58 says this is a normative statement, and that's the correct answer. Okay, let's take a look at this. Prices rise when the government increases the quantity of money. This is a positive statement because you're talking about a relationship. If government increases quantity of money, price goes up. And in fact, you could collect data to see if this statement is true or if it's false. You can confirm or refute this statement. The government should print less money. Well, this is a normative statement. This is a value judgment. You cannot try to confirm or refute this using data alone. Yeah, so the key thing here is that to get to the conclusion that the government should print less money, you not only need to know that prices rise when the government increases the quantity of money, you also need a value judgment saying that prices rise or inflation is bad, is not good for the economy, or is not good for the welfare of the people in this society. There you have a value judgment. And then you can say, okay, so based on the positive statement that you just see that increasing the quantity of money would cause inflation, plus this value judgment that inflation, this result, is not good, hence the government should print less money. So here, the key thing for normativeness is there's a value judgment here. Next one, positive or normative. A tax cut is needed to stimulate the economy. Positive, normative, or don't know? Okay, so you have 10 more seconds. Please hurry up if you have not finished. Okay, time's up. Let's look at the answers. So 20 of you say it's a positive, 42 normative, 1 don't know. And the answer is this is a normative statement. Last one. An increase in the price of burritos will cause an increase in consumer demand for movie streaming. positive, normative, or don't know. So I think you have like roughly 10 seconds left. So you should hurry up. Okay, time's up. Let's look at the results. So 54 say positive, 10 say normative, 2 say don't know. And the answer is this is a positive statement. Okay, so a tax cut is needed to stimulate the economy. So if this were a positive statement, it should say a tax cut will stimulate the economy. So for that statement, you can collect data to see, oh, so these countries had a tax cut, those countries did not, and see if the economy is stimulated in this one or not, or yeah, you can do that. But when you say a tax cut is needed to stimulate the economy, you have this value judgment that's embedding here that somehow it's needed. So that part is a normative statement. Next one, this increase in the price of burritos will cause the increase in consumer demand for movie streaming. It's a very weird statement. I have no idea why this statement could be true, or this is a positive statement. It describes a crazy relationship between burrito prices and consumer demand for streaming movies. It's likely false, but it is a positive statement. A statement need not be true to be positive. And the whole point is that you can falsify it. That's why it's a positive statement. All right, so economists actually serve as a lot of roles in the government. In the US, you have the Council of Economic Advisors. These advise the president. Actually, Greg Mankiw served as one of the chairmen of this Council of Economic Advisors. And so they write an annual report to the president. In the government, you also have the Office of Management and Budget. You try to formulate spending plans and policies. In the Department of Treasury, economists there design tax policies. So this is the US. You can think of Taiwan. Although we don't really have a Council of Economic Advisors, so a lot of the economists, they write books or they write news articles, editorials, trying to advise what the government should do. Yeah, but maybe we should try to move towards that direction so that we have more advice that's heard by the president. In the Department of Labor, so in the US, they analyze worker data and look at unemployment data. So people are looking for work. And based on that, they formulate labor market policies. In the Department of Justice, of course, antitrust laws are enforced. And in the Congressional Budget Office, these economists try to help the Congress. Think about Taiwan. Yeah, so I think the Department of Labor, traditionally, they don't hire that many economists. But I do think they should. They should collaborate with economists more and more, trying to analyze the data and to get the right labor market policies. For example, in the past couple of years, the minimum wage has been raised like 5 or 6 times. And the question is, should you increase the minimum wage, say, next year? It depends on a lot of things, and we need a lot of data. We need to analyze the data and to use economic theory to interpret this data to formulate the right policy. The central bank in the US is the Federal Reserve. Of course, in Taiwan, we have our central bank. They set the monetary policy, and of course, their economics is very important in terms of what is the right monetary policy to actually implement. Should we increase the interest rate, or should we lower the interest rate? In Taiwan, it's even more complicated because we have foreign exchange market. Should the central bank buy more dollars or sell more dollars? We have this policy as well, in addition to monetary policy. Okay, what I do want to say is that even though economists try to advise the president might not listen to economists because the president gets advice from a whole bunch of people. Economists, communication advisors, press, PR advisors, legislative affair advisors, political advisors, and then he makes a choice. So the final government decision is a very complicated process where economists only have part of the input. And okay, so if you look at the news, you will find that economists disagree and they actually give conflicting policy advice. And why do they disagree? They can disagree because different positive theories are tested or are debated. So if I think this positive statement is true, you think this positive statement is false, then we could disagree. In addition, we could have different values. I might value equality more than efficiency. And so different normative views about what policy should try to do, that could differ as well. So, but there are a lot of propositions that most economists agree. Let's take a look. Ticket sales. Laws that limit the resale of tickets for entertainment and sport events make potential audience members for those events worse off on average. In Taiwan, we also have this problem of 黄牛票. So if you want to go to see this rock and roll band, or if you want to watch baseball, you might have this ticket resale. So you could have imposed that you are not supposed to resell these tickets, or you cannot charge an excessive price, and so on. So here the statement is that this law that limits resale makes these audience worse off on average. Agree or disagree? So two questions. Do you agree on this, or do you think economists would agree or disagree on this statement? Okay, let's take a look. So first, this is a poll. So do you agree or disagree with this following statement? Laws that limit the resale of tickets for entertainment and sports events make potential audience members for those events worse off. Agree or disagree? Actually, here I'll give you a scale. The economists were actually surveyed the same question with this scale as well, going from strongly agree, uncertain, to disagree, and strongly disagree. Of course, you can say, I have no opinion, or I prefer not to answer. Okay, so we can wait for people to make their choice. Actually, so I will be showing the data of the economists. Actually, so it's a whole bunch of US economists were asked this question and to express their opinion. If you want, you can even go to the website of this polling agency. You actually show which economists made what choice. And so you can check, like say, oh, what is Greg Mankiw's answer? Or what's Darren Osomoglu's answer? And so on. All right, so let's look at people's opinion. So we have 26 of you agree, 19 disagree, 20 disagree, and 7 strongly disagree. And it could be uncertain. Yeah, so okay, so that's the data. Now, please predict what economists think. Do economists agree or disagree? 100% agree, 50 to 99% agree, 1 to 49 disagree. I think there's a typo here. It's 1 to 49% agree, not disagree. And then 0 economists agree or don't know. So this is how much percentage of economists would agree on this statement. And so that accounts strongly agree and agree. Okay, I think time's up. And so we should look at the answer. These are your response. So 39 of you think it's above 50%, 22 below 50%. So 39 of you are correct. So let's look at the data. 80% of the economists agree on this statement. 12 are uncertain, 8% disagree. So there's a source down here. This is the IGM Economic Expert Panel. And so if you're interested, you could actually look at a whole bunch of different questions. This survey was done quite a while ago, but they have been continuing surveying economists. So you will look at a lot of what do you think about the trade war or the effect of COVID and so on. All right, so here's a list of propositions most economists agree. A ceiling on rent reduces the quantity and quality of housing available. 90% agree. Tariffs and import quotas usually reduce general economic welfare. 93% agree. The US should not restrict employers from outsourcing work to foreign countries. 90% agree. The US should eliminate agricultural subsidies. 85% of the economists agree. So here it's a quite strong consensus. Local and state governments should eliminate subsidies to professional sports franchise. 85% agree. Cash payments increase the welfare of recipients to a greater degree than do transfers in kind of equal cash value. So instead of giving out food or actual items, giving you cash would actually increase the welfare of the recipient. 84% agree. A large federal budget deficit has an adverse effect on the economy. 83% agree. The US should not ban genetically modified crops. 82% agree. A minimum wage increase is unemployment among young and unskilled workers. 79% agree. Government subsidies on ethanol in the US should be reduced or eliminated. 78% agree. All right, so think of this situation. You're watching 有话好说 at home. The first focus segment is a discussion on the pros and cons of free trade. For balance, there are two economists, one support of free trade and one opposed. And your dad says, oh, those economists, they have no idea what's going on. They can't agree on anything. One says free trade makes us rich. The other says it will drive us into poverty. So if the experts don't know, how is the average person ever going to know whether free trade is best? So that's your dad. Now, can you give your dad any insight into why economists might agree on this issue? That's question A. So why economists might disagree on free trade? This is an open-end question, so you can type in your question. Please take your time. Quite a few of you have already made your answers, and you can still answer this question. So let me show you some of the results. If you're still in the middle, you can still type in. So yeah, so they might come from different backgrounds, because free trade made inequality more severe. Some nations, free trade makes divide rich people richer, but poor people poorer. It might result in poverty to normal citizens. And free trade may cause the gap between poor, that we already saw that similarly. It lessens diversity of industry in the country, so that's something. So the example that is true to be positive is must be true. Some monopoly situations may ruin the free, so there's monopoly, so people may disagree. Okay, so I think there's a lot of responses here. Let me scroll down to the very beginning. So inequality could be a reason why economists disagree on free trade. There might be free trade can be easily manipulated by vendors or large corporations. The opinions could be based on different models. To protect local businesses, they think of benefit of individuals or instead of the whole economy. So there could be evidence supporting both sides of the argument. There could be information asymmetry. Okay, so one thing I want to say is that I'm not asking do you agree or disagree on free trade, is why some economists might agree, but some might disagree. Humans aren't rational. That's a good reason. So let's proceed. So here the idea is to think about why people might disagree. So now suppose you discover 93% of economists believe that free trade is generally best. And so that's quite agreement on any single issue. Could you now give a more precise answer as to why economists might disagree on this issue? And also, what if you later discovered that the economists opposed to free trade worked for a labor union? Would that help you explain why there appears to be a difference in opinion on this issue? So now the data has shown that 93% of economists, they agree on free trade. Okay, so if you discover that the economist on TV who's opposed to free trade worked for a labor union, so would that help you explain why there appears to be a difference in opinion? Or more precisely, why would an economist who's working for a labor union would be opposed to free trade? The answers are coming in, so I think let's just show it. I think that the key, one of the issues that you see these problem here is that what is the position of the labor union? Well, a lot of times labor unions are opposed to free trade because that means that the union workers would have to face foreign competition, or even the companies might just outsource the production to a different country. And if the economist is paid by the labor union, then of course it's likely that the economist would express opinion that's consistent with the labor union. It's like if you ask somebody who's building a nuclear power plant, is the nuclear power plant safe? Well, of course, the nuclear power plant builder would say, nuclear power plant is 200% safe, definitely safe. But is it truly that it's safe? Or is it because if the builder expresses any doubt, he would not be able to win the contract, or he will lose his job because he's working for these nuclear power plant companies? That is the challenge here. So there is this distortion that could be there. I really appreciate all your answers that are coming in, but we need to finish this chapter before class ends. So let's go on. So this is the summary. So economists as scientists, they make assumptions, they use models, and so we already have two examples here, the PPF and the, if you remember, circular flow diagram. And then microeconomists think about decision-making about households and firms and how they interact. Macroeconomists study the force and trend that affects the whole economy. And so a positive statement is a statement about how the world is. A normative statement is about how the world ought to be. And so as policy advisors, economists would also make normative statements. And they would offer conflicting advice because there could be a difference in scientific judgment, believing this positive statement is true or less likely to be true, or they could differ in terms of value. So this chapter is about how economists think. And so we had two models. That's my summary. And this is the homework. So Manku chapter 2, problem 3 and 4. And so any questions about this chapter? Does free trade bring more positive income to a country, more negative? It is a very good, interesting question to ask the free trade. So does that really help a country, or it does not? We will talk about gains from trade in chapter 3. So please look forward to that. That's the end of chapter 2. See you on Monday, where we'll go through chapter 3 on gains from trade.